Hey guys, Code Made Simple here. Today I'll be teaching you how to use Drizzle ORM. For those that are unfamiliar, an ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper. It's essentially a layer over your raw SQL code that you can use to interact with your database using your favorite programming language. In this case for Drizzle, we'll be using TypeScript. Right now we are on the Drizzle documentation page. If you're having any troubles or want to learn a little bit more about Drizzle, feel free to check it out. It's pretty comprehensive in my opinion. So why should we use Drizzle as compared to other more popular ORMs such as Prisma? Drizzle is known to be very performant, and especially when compared to Prisma. It also works well in serverless environments. Prisma also suffers this thing called cold starts, where the first query to the database tends to be a little bit slow. Drizzle kind of solves this by reducing the latency. Drizzle also works well on the edge for certain drivers, unlike Prisma which cannot work on the edge at all. And Drizzle also can support many of the more popular database providers such as Cursor and Zata. For this tutorial, we will be using the very popular Neon database, which is a Postgres database. Drizzle also has this thing called Drizzle Studio. It's essentially a UI for you to interact with your database. So yeah, I hope you're excited. Let's get into it. Unlike longer tutorials, I want to quickly skim through the process of setting up Drizzle. In my opinion, the Drizzle setup contains a lot of boilerplate code that can be easily replicated. In order to keep this tutorial as concise as possible, let me quickly go through what I did. If there are any questions, please do let me know down in the comments below. So the first thing I did was to install two packages, Drizzle ORM as well as Drizzle Kit. So Drizzle ORM is the core library for Drizzle, whereas Drizzle Kit is a dev dependency. Drizzle Kit is essentially a CLI tool that we use to create migrations as well as push it to the database. The second thing I did was to declare this drizzle.config.ts. And in this file, we actually define the behavior of Drizzle. We import this define config function from DrizzleKit and pass it an object with parameters. This schema parameter over here indicates the path for the models folder. So in Drizzle, we have this schema.ts folder. File. In this file, we actually define the models that we want to push to the database, and the path will be indicated over here. So /db/schema.ts. So dialect refers to the database type. In this case, we are using a Neon database, which is a Postgres database. So for out, it defines the path at which we will be, the path of our folder which we will be storing our migration files. So in this case, by default, it will actually be Drizzle. When we generate our migration folder, it will create a Drizzle folder over here and store our migration files inside. But in order for me to keep my file structure a little bit neater, I decided to store it under the DB folder, which I feel it makes a little bit more sense. And lastly, this DB credentials key over here, you have this URL string which points to our database connection string. Yeah, and it is stored in the environment variables. The next thing I'll do is actually also create this DB folder, and I'll have an index.ts folder. So this index.ts folder I would use to declare my database clients. So this DB variable is exportable and essentially used to do CRUD operations. So the Drizzle Neon Postgres driver is very unique to Neon itself, and that's something that you have to take note when using your Drizzle. When you're using different serverless platforms, you will have to declare the database client a little differently. For Drizzle, there are two ways to declare it. You can declare it by first using Neon HTTP from Drizzle ORM. The second way you can do it is also by adding an additional layer, an additional Neon driver layer from Neon database/serverless, which is an external package. So you might be asking, what's the difference between the first option and the second option? In my opinion, there isn't much, but the key difference is that the second option unlocks another key feature called transactions, which you might not need in certain projects, but it's just a good thing to know. So let me give you an example. If I were to use something like BunSQL, I will actually have to import Drizzle from BunSQL instead of Neon HTTP. This is actually quite important, so make sure you keep this in mind. Okay, so now we're going to talk about schemas. So this is a mock schema of a social media app where we have users, posts, and comments. So the way we define our tables is by using this PG table, and this is unique to Postgres itself. If you were to use something like MySQL, you will have to import MySQL table instead, right? And if you use something like SQLite, you have to import SQLite table. But in this case, since we're using Neon, we're going to use PG table. So PG table accepts two parameters. One's a string, one's an object. So the first parameter, which is a string, indicates the table name. I try to keep the variable name and the table name the same, because this variable actually has some meaning to it. The variable is used to generate types that we can use in our client code, and in order to reduce confusion, try to make sure that these two names remain the same. And same goes for the fields. So for this object, we define the fields. Text indicates a string-like object, and by default, all fields in Drizzle are nullable. So in order to override that default behavior, we just use .not null. We then indicate .primary key, and because I want this ID to be auto-generating, I decided to put a default function. You can do something else, but I prefer to do it this way with crypto.randomUUID. And yeah, same thing goes for email and name. For foreign keys, we use the dot references. So for this post, we actually have an author ID, and we have a dot references pointing to the user's variable and dot ID. For references, we can also indicate behavior such as on delete. And I would like to, I think for most scenarios, you will put cascade over here. Cascade basically means that if a user was deleted, the corresponding user post regarding that user will also be deleted. And same thing goes for the comments. Yeah, so it's pretty much quite replicatable and quite simple to understand. I won't be going through all the different data types in this tutorial, but if you go under the PostgreSQL section, you can find a lot more different data types. Some of the more common ones are integer and text. There's also Boolean. You can go check it out. If you're using something like MySQL, you instead import it from MySQL core. That's just something to take note. For this tutorial, we will be using Neon database, which is a Postgres database. Neon has a very generous free tier, where the first 10 projects are completely free, no credit card required. So let's get started. I'm going to log in my Gmail account, which I'm already logged in. I'm going to click new project. I'm going to just create a project tutorial. I'll put Drizzle tutorial as my database name. And I'll put my region as Virginia for now, and Azure as my service provider. Click create. And there we go, we have created our database. In order to connect with it, we have to click this connect button over here. And then get the connection string, copy it, and paste it in your project. So in the env file, I'll paste it over here. Of course, don't use my connection string, use your own one if you're following my tutorial. And yeah, we are basically connected to our database. In order to push our tables to the database, we will use the DrizzleKit CLI. So npx DrizzleKit generates. So by doing this, we have created a migrations folder, and we have created a SQL folder with all the corresponding SQL code, as you can see over here. In order to push all this to the database, we will first write npx DrizzleKit push. Give it a second, and yes, we've applied our changes, as you can see below. If you were to go back to Neon and click on tables, we can see that we have our tables here. Another thing to note is that Drizzle has this thing called Drizzle Studio, as I mentioned before. So we can just try it out, Studio. And if we were to click onto the URL and open it, as you can see, we can interact with the database through this UI. Essentially, it works similar to the Neon's console, but I feel that Drizzle Studio is a little bit more interactive and easier to use. Now that the setup is complete, let's start by doing some CRUD operations. The first thing I want to do is create a user. So to do that, I'll write await db, and this db will be imported from the index file that we created. So import db from dot slash db slash index, and in this db variable we'll do dot insert, and we'll import the users variable that we declared inside the schema.ts file. So users from dot slash db slash schema. After the dot insert function, we'll do dot values, and dot values actually takes a list of the different values that we want to insert. So in this case, I have two mandatory fields, email and name, so I'll just write them down. Name would be, I'll just put John, and email would be example@gmail.com. Notice how that this is completely type safe. If I were to remove email, it will actually throw an error. So this will be, I'll assign it a variable called result. If I want to return back the user on completion, I just have to write returning. Dot returning returns a list of all the users that were created. So I'll just console log this, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so over here, I'll write npm run dev. Yeah, as you can see, it returns back the user, and in theory, that means that we have successfully inserted a user into our database. So if we check our Neon dashboard and go to users, you can see that we have successfully added a user. Let's try multiple users. If I were to try multiple users, let's say /John. Not John, let's say /Mary, an email of example@gmail.com. And I try it again. It returns both of the users, and if I were to go back to my Neon dashboard, you can see that there's two users being added. Updating is similar to creating. So await db -update users, and instead of values we do .set, and we indicate the values that we want to change. So let's say I want to change in our database over here, I want to change this this user with this ID John to maybe another name, maybe Bob. So to do that, we'll go back here, we'll set the name to Bob, and in order to indicate which entry we want to update, we'll use the .where clause, and inside we have to do something that's very unique to Drizzle. So we'll import this equal function from Drizzle ORM, and we'll use it to indicate that we want the user with the ID of, let me go back to our Neon database, I'll just copy this ID over here and go back to the screen and just paste it over here. We want the user's ID, we want to update the name to Bob for the user with the ID of this, and we try this. And of course there's also the returning clause that you can put in, but I won't do it for this example. I run npm run dev, and if you were to go back to the database, you can see that the entry that that had this ID has his name changed to Bob. Deleting is actually quite similar to updating, so we'll just do await db.delete users, but instead of .values, we'll do .where, and this is where we specify what entry should we delete. So I would like to introduce you to another operator. So in this case, I'll use OR. OR basically allows us to put in as many equal functions as we want in order to create more conditions. So in this case, I want to delete users that have names equal to Mary or John. So I'll just write users dot name Mary and equals to users dot name John. So this line of code means that we'll be deleting any users who has the name Mary or John. So right now in our database we have 3 entries with 3 names: Mary, Bob, and John. After running this code, see there are no errors, so in theory this should work. We go back to users, we can see that 2 of those entries are being deleted. I'd like to introduce you to another operator. In this case, it's the AND clause. Similar to the OR clause, this is an AND where, okay, this doesn't really make sense, but let's say we have an email where example@gmail.com. So in this case, we are indicating that we want to delete users with the email example.com and has a name of John. So this is a little bit different from OR, where we delete users with the email email of example@gmail.com or users with John. Lastly, let's talk about querying data. For this section, I've actually populated the database with new data, as you can see over here. So I've added some new users. Each user now has a unique email address as well as a unique name. I've also added a new field called age with an integer data type. So in order to query data, we use the .select clause. So in this case, I want to fetch all the users. I'll use .select .from users. So if you do not specify any conditions, Drizzle just automatically assumes that you want all the users in the database. So I'm just going to run npm run def. I need to save it. Npm run def. As you can see, we get all the users from the database and its corresponding fields. If you only want to get a certain field, let's say name, you can just add an object inside the select clause and then assign it to the users.name, something like this. So if I were to run this, I'll clear it first, npm run def. As you can see, we only get the name of the user. This doesn't have to be name, it can be whatever you want. I can just call it username. Now I run it again. As you can see, it works just fine, regardless of what the key name is. Alright, so let's start doing some conditions. So for the next task, I'm gonna fetch a user with the team@gmail.com as an email. So over here, I pre-written this code. We use the .select clause and we use the .where to assign the condition. We use this equal, similar to how we do create and update, to symbolize that the users.email must be equal to team@gmail.com. Alright, so if I will save this and run it, as you can see, we get the user entry with the email of team@gmail.com. Alright, so I'll just comment this out. The next task is to fetch the users with age above 50. So this is the code to do that. To do this, we have to use a new function that I've not yet introduced to you called GTE. So Drizzle has a lot of different functions. I can't possibly name all of them, but one of the more common ones is GTE, which stands for greater than and equal to. So this means that the user's age must be greater than 50 or equal to 50. Of course, you can change this to something like GT, which means greater than, but for this example, I'll just use GTE. So if I were to run this, as you can see, we get all the users whose age is above 50 or equal to 50, as you can see with Kevin over here. Alright. So the next one, we'll have to fetch users with age between 50 and 60. So to do this, we actually have to use the AND operand, the AND function over here. So this stands for LTE. This LTE stands for less than or equal to. Yeah, so by using and, we combine these two conditions together to get between 50 and 60. I'll just run this, npm run dev. And yeah, there we go. We get all the users that's between 50 and 60. Lastly, we now want to order the users by alphabetical order based on their name. Alright, so to do this, we use .order by, and we pass in either descending or ascending. So I can either use ascending or descending, but for this case, I'll use descending. So it starts from A and ends with Z. So if I were to run this, so as you can see, it starts with T, and then it ends with G. Yeah, so it's alphabetical order. If this still kind of feels too chaotic for you, I have good news. Drizzle has the ability to query data similar to how you do in Prisma. So let me just show you how it works. So we go to this index.ts file, and we want to import the whole schema.ts file. So we do it like this: schema from /schema. By doing this, we pass it as a parameter inside the database client. By doing this, we actually unlock database.query. So we'll do something like this. So let's say for this task, ordering users by alphabetical order by name. So by doing this, we, instead of using the .select clause, we'll use db.query.users, which is the table we want to query data from. So we can use find first or find many. For those that use Prisma before, you might feel right at home. So in this case, we'll use find many. And then we'll do order by. We'll basically copy this line of code, this descending code, over here. And we'll add it to the order by. So this line of code basically functions the same as this line of code. But in my opinion, this feels a little bit more cleaner. So I'll just run it to show you. npm run dev. As you can see, it's still the same results. And yeah, this is pretty cool. So there's other fields you can put in, so like where. So this operates the same as .where. You can also put limits, so you can limit the amount of entries that you query from the database. There's also offsets. You can start from the nth number of entries. So instead of starting from here, you can start from somewhere here. So yeah, this is another way to query data, and it might be more comfortable for people who use Prisma. A common question that I get is, what's the point of using the .select clause when you can use the DB query API? So there are multiple reasons, but one of the main reasons that I feel is the most concrete is that .select allows you to it's a lower level API that allows you to do things like right joins and left joins. So let me show you. Let's say you want to combine two tables together. You can do something like .right join or .left join. It's a lower level API, so you can interact a little bit more with the low level code, and it's similar to SQL. So DB query can't really do this, so yeah. So before I end this video, I want to quickly just mention about the magical SQL operator. If the select clause and the db.query clause can't really give you the low level control that you want, you can actually write your own SQL code using this SQL template. I'll leave this in the description below. I'm not very familiar with it, but it's definitely something that I will look into in the future. So yeah, this will be the end of the video. I feel like Drizzle ORM is a very unique framework and it does take a bit of practice to get used to. Do check out the documentation if you want to find out more about Drizzle. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you next time.